Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do my book haul for the month of October. I can't believe we are almost in the month of November. This year has been a weird mix of going too fast and seeming absolutely interminable, but I can't believe it's time for an October book haul already. So let's dive into it. I have a bunch of things to talk about. The first two, I'm going to break a rule, something I haven't done in a while. I'm going to talk about two library books that I got. Don't usually talk about library books because they don't make sense when I do a book haul revisit. Sometimes I don't get to them and I just return them and then get back on a wait list. But I want to talk about these two because they are timely for other things that are going on. The first one is The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. This is published by Knopf, and the reason this is notable is that it is a finalist for the Booker Prize, which will be announced next week at the time I'm filming this. And obviously, since the Booker will be announced next week, and this is a big book, I don't think I will be getting to it by the time the award will be announced. At least I won't be finished with it by the time the award is announced. But it's just nice that it's here as part of that conversation. I'll put a link to my shortlist reaction for the Booker Prize in the description box down below. You can check that out if you would like. So we'll see what happens with The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. Now, usually when I do a book haul, I read the first sentence, or at least a little bit of the opening of the book, not always just one sentence. So might as well do that for these. The first sentence of The Great Circle is, and by the way, it has a map. I love a book with a map, and that will come back later on. Los Angeles, December 2014. I only knew about Marion Graves because one of my uncle's girlfriends liked to dump me at the library when I was a kid, and one time I picked up a random book called something like Brave Ladies of the Sky. My parents had gone up in a plane and never come back, and it turned out a decent percentage of the brave ladies had met the same fate. That got my attention. The other one is another pretty massive book. The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honorée Fanonne Jeffers. This is published by Harper. And I have had my eyes on this book since it was released. What finally got my attention was first that it was put on the long list for the National Book Award. It did not make the short list, but it was on the long list, and I'll put my reaction to that in the description box down below as well. But Honorée Fanonne Jeffers did an interview with the New York Times Book Review podcast, and I just loved everything she had to say. So that really made me get on the hold list for this book. I didn't think it was going to be available for a while. It's even bigger than The Great Circle, and it's only a 14-day loan. So if either of these is going to happen, I'm going to have to get a move on. And I'm in a bit of a reading slump right now, so I don't know how this is going to work. But so again, I don't know if I'll get to these. That's part of why I don't include library books in my hauls. But since they're here and timely, I thought it would be fun to mention that they got here. And let's do the opening of Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois as well. Part 1, Song. We are the earth, the land, the tongue that speaks and trips on the names of the dead as it dares to tell these stories of a woman's line. Her people and her dirt, her trees, her water. Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honorée Fanonne Jeffers. Let's get into the book haul proper and talk about something that I forgot to include in one of my past book hauls, and I don't quite know how that happened. It's Taste, My Life Through Food by Stanley Tucci. And I think what happened is this is actually an advanced reader's copy that was gifted to Joel and I by an independent store. We were talking with them about pre-ordering this book, and they just so happened to have an advanced reader's copy of it, which is why this is paperback. So I think that, combined with the fact that Joel was on the road and read it, I think just it slipped through the cracks. But I'm currently reading it, and it occurred to me that I hadn't talked about it in a haul video, and because I do book haul revisits where I talk about how I've done, and because I'm currently reading this, selfishly, I want it to be somewhere so I can, when I check myself for accountability, I can say, yes, I read that book. It's my channel, my rules. So this is published by Gallery, and it is about Stanley Tucci's life, obviously, his childhood. It is sort of a spiritual cousin to his CNN show, which is Searching for Italy, where he travels from to different regions of Italy and talks about the food politics of the area and a little bit about his life story, but it's really just about the food politics of Italy. This is much more about his personal journey. I am, I think, 76 pages into it and was really enjoying it. Can't wait to get further. Somebody asked on a Friday Reads video if it was just the show in book form, and I would say it's not. The show is a very different thing. They are kind of linked inherently because it's Stanley Tucci doing both of them, but this is much more his personal story. It's much more about his childhood and his relationship to food throughout his life. That's sort of the framework for his life story, and he's a very charming person, so I'm really looking forward to finishing this book and talking more about it at some point. And let's do the opening of Stanley Tucci's memoir entitled Taste. We're not going to do the introduction. We are going to go to chapter 1. Not scintillating, but necessary information about my past. I grew up in Katonah, New York, a beautiful town about 60 miles north of Manhattan. We moved there when I was 3 years of age from Peekskill, New York, a small city with a large Italian population on the Hudson River, where my father's family had settled after immigrating from Calabria. And then it goes from there. And that sounds like sort of an information dump, a lot of exposition, but trust me, this is a very charming book, and I would recommend checking it out. The next one is Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. This is a sequel to Benjamin Alire Sáenz's book, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, and this is published by Simon & Schuster. It is a YA novel. If you have read the first book, it's about Aristotle and Dante. They become friends, and there's really no way of not spoiling the first book by talking about this book. So they become a couple at the end of the first book. And in this sequel, they are struggling to adapt to the world because this is set in the mid to late 1980s. So they are living at a time when gay people are really not accepted. I mean, there's still not a lot of acceptance right now, but they're living in a time when it's really just not talked about, not accepted, and not done. Coming out of the closet and being part of a gay relationship. So they are struggling with what their future might look like. They're struggling with how to have a relationship in a society that doesn't really accept you. And they're not really struggling with their family because their family is actually very supportive, but there's also the looming AIDS crisis in the background, and they are also seniors in high school, so they're figuring out what they're going to do with their life, the fact that they are probably going to be going to college in very different areas. So it's about them facing in adulthood on the horizon and trying to figure out how they are going to meet it. They are very grown-up kids. The teenagers in this book don't really talk like teenagers in the real world. They are very emotionally intelligent and philosophical. And that's not just Aristotle and Dante, it's like all of the teenagers, but it's a really beautiful story. I'm reading this one right now as well. I'm listening to it on audio, actually. And it is read by Lin-Manuel Miranda, so I can't tell you which way to go. I pre-ordered the book not knowing that it was going to be available on order, but I'm happy I have a copy on the shelf. Anyway, but Lin-Manuel Miranda is a fantastic narrator, so you really can't go wrong either way, because the book itself is just pretty. It's really pretty, and I am a big fan. Here is the first book right there. I'm going to try to hold it so it's not looking really shiny. But I definitely recommend this one, especially if you've read the first one. And if you haven't read it, you can go back and read the first one. I think that would probably be better. I wish I had had time to reread the first book before I dove into this one. But it does explain enough that you will be okay if you have not read the first one. So that is Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. Let's do the first sentence of this book. And here he was, Dante, with his head resting on my chest. In the stillness of the dawn, there was only the sound of Dante's breathing. It was as though the universe had stopped whatever it was doing just to look down on two boys who had discovered its secrets. Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World by Benjamin Alire Sáenz. The next book I brought into my library in the month of October is Harlem Shuffle by Colson, Whitehead. This is published by Doubleday, and this is the first time I have ever owned a Colson Whitehead book. I got Underground Railroad from the library, and I listened to an audio of the Nickel Boys on Libby. So this is a big step for me, and I've never read any of his earlier novels, even though a couple of them have been on my radar, including Sab. Oh, it's not true. I read Zone 1 and I did not like it. I always forget that, though. So Sag Harbor and Apex Hides the Hurt are early novels of his that are sort of on my radar, but I have not gotten around to reading. It would be tempting to wonder if Colson Whitehead will be winning a third Pulitzer Prize after he had back-to-back wins for Underground Railroad and The Nickel Boys, but no one has ever won 3 Pulitzer Prizes, so that would be a huge hurdle to get over, and this is also a bit of a departure from those 2 books, and it's a bit of a deliberate departure for him, because Colson Whitehead has said that he had already started work on the Nickel Boys when he won the Pulitzer Prize for Underground Railroad, and he doesn't usually like to do two serious books in a row. And this one is sort of serious, but it plays with elements of a sort of heist thriller and uses that sort of crime novel frame to tell a story about Harlem in the 1960s and about a family and explore the socio-political realities of a black family living in a black neighborhood in New York City at the time. It follows a man named Ray, who is a sort of upstanding furniture salesman who comes from a bit of a crooked family, who finds himself leading a sort of double life as he tries to maintain his reputation as that sort of upstanding man, but he gets drawn into a heist that goes wrong and then leads to other complications and things like that. And it just sounds really fascinating because it seems like it plays with those aspects of the thriller, but then everything else that Colson Whitehead puts in there sounds really fascinating to me. So I am very much looking forward to reading this at some point. Let us check out the opening of this book. Part 1, The Truck, 1959. His cousin Freddie brought him on the heist one hot night in early June. Ray Carney was having one of his runaround days, uptown, downtown, zipping across the city, keeping the machine humming. First up was Radio Row to unload the final 3 consoles, 2 RCAs, and a Magnavox, and pick up the TV he had left. That is the beginning of Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. The next book for my October book haul is Please Don't Sit on My Bed in Your Outside Clothes, Essays by Phoebe Robinson. This is published by Tiny Reparation Books, and I will talk about Tiny Reparation Books in a little bit. I think first it makes sense to explain how I sort of got to know Phoebe Robinson. I was introduced to her through the podcast Two Dope Queens, which is a comedy podcast that was co-hosted by Phoebe Robinson and Jessica Williams, who used to be on The Daily Show. And I discovered the podcast because when Jessica Williams left The Daily Show, I looked her up to see what she was going to be doing, and I found out that she had a comedy podcast. I started to listen to it, and the rest is history. And what's really interesting is at the time, Jessica Williams was the more known person in the cast, and she still is, but Phoebe Robinson has definitely been on the come up ever since. That podcast started in 2016, and they did their last episode in 2018. I believe. They also parlayed it into 2 seasons on HBO, which are now on HBO Max if you'd like to check it out. And what is really significant about Two Dope Queens, by the way, I still listen to it, even though they haven't done a new episode since 2018. I listen to it all the time. It's sort of comfort listening for me. But anyway, the notable thing about Two Dope Queens was that it really wanted to focus on highlighting and showcasing comedians who didn't typically get as much of a chance or as much of a spotlight in the world of comedy. For instance, they talked about how, as female comedians, they were frequently told if they were going on tour, oh, we already have a woman booked for the night. We can't have more than one woman, which is ludicrous, but apparently still something that happens in this day and age. So they really wanted to highlight female comedians, minorities, and LGBTQ comedians and have them tell and share their stories so they would have sort of equal access to the spotlight and an equal opportunity. And that is the same mission that is behind Tiny Reparations Books, the imprint that Phoebe Robinson started. It is a division of Penguin Random House. So part of why she applied that mission to a publishing house is that when she shopped around her first essay collection, which was called You Can't Touch My Hair and Other Things I Still Have to Tell People, publishers were really not ashamed to tell her that they didn't think anybody was gonna want to read funny essays from a black woman who was unflinchingly open and honest about her life, her career, and especially her sex life. And the book became a New York Times bestseller when she finally did find a publisher who would put it out. And then she released a second essay collection, which was called Everything's Trash, But It's Okay. And now this is her third, but it's the first from her own imprint. And they're going to be releasing a lot of new books next year. And I love that mission statement. And I've read both of Phoebe's books. They are very funny. She is a really great comedian. And she actually has an HBO special of her own out now as well called Sorry, Harriet Tubman, which is a reference to things that they talked about on Two Dope Queens a fair amount, and I'm looking forward to watching that as well. I'm really happy that she has done well. I'm really happy to have a copy of her book and to support this publishing enterprise that she is on. Let's do the opening of her new essay collection. The introduction is called 2020 Was Gonna Be My Year, LOL, but I'm not gonna read the opening of that. We're gonna go to the actual first chapter and start with that. By the way, there are footnotes. I believe there are footnotes in both of her previous essay collections as well. Chapter 1. Yes, I have free time because I don't have kids. There are only a handful of toys I still remember from my childhood. The Skip It, which I was convinced made me an athlete, my Pee Wee Herman pull-string talking doll, and my favorite one, a baby doll I creatively named Baby, which eventually got decapitated, but still, every night, the head and the rest of her body slept side by side with me in bed. Don't ask. Wait, actually you should, because what I just described was low-key serial killer in training thing to do. And that is the beginning of Please Don't Sit on My Bed in Your Outside Clothes by Phoebe Robinson. The next book in my book haul is Monster in the Middle by Tiphanie Yanique. I pre-ordered this from Montana Book Company, and they sent it with this lovely little note that just says, we heart you, Montana Book Company, and it has a Scholastic 100 sticker on it. So that was really cute. But Monster in the Middle by Tiphanie Yanique is the book. This is published by Riverhead. What really intrigued me about this book, I discovered it when I was doing my video about new releases in the second part of 2021 that I am really looking forward to, and I'll link that video down below as well, is that this is a love story that also deals with the generational baggage we inherit from our families, as well as dealing with race and immigration. It's about two characters, Fly and Stella, who meet in 21st century New York under circumstances that feel like fate, but the question of whether or not they are meant to be goes back at least a generation to the earliest loves of their parents. Monster in the Middle tells a love story that spans decades of the history of two different families, suggesting that we can't answer the question of who we are meant to be without first understanding who we are and how we came to be, which to me sounds really fascinating, like a very unique way of looking at a love story and just a story in general. Let us do the opening. This is where a map is going to come back into play. I mentioned I love a book with a map. And look at this. How cool is that? The opening of this book is a love letter. Dear loves, when you fall in love, you will be certain that it is something special about that other person. Isn't that what the songs on the radio make us think? Or maybe you will be smart enough to know it's also something special about you. Because that is what the therapists on TV get paid to help you understand, am I right? You already know that you will bring baggage into this new love thing because it's modern times and you've heard the term baggage. But baggage is not the most of it, you know. We know, because listen, sweet ones, you are not falling in love with that one person. It's that you're bringing it all. You're bringing us. It's like how them old-timey folks used to say that when two people get married, it's two families coming together. Or another way to understand it is that when you meet your love, you are meeting all the people who ever loved them, or who were supposed to love them but didn't love them enough, or hell, didn't love them at all. You feel where this is going, my loves? Please pay attention, knuckleheads, because it's going regardless. Love your parents. And that is the opening of Monster in the Middle by Tiphanie Yanique. I think that's a really intriguing way to start this book. The next book is Dutiful Boy, a memoir of secrets, lies, and family love. This is published by Vintage, and the author is Mohsin Zaidi. I heard about this book from Jen the Librarian. I will put a link to her channel in the description box down below. It is a memoir about growing up in a devout Muslim household as a gay man and having to hide that from the rest of his family. After he makes it to Oxford, Hamid is forced to decide if he should live the life that his family expects him to live or if he should come out and live his truth. And it sounds really interesting, very fascinating. Can't wait to get to this at some point. This is a candidate for my TBR for June of next year when I like to focus on LGBTQ stories. So the opening of this book is, my dad's back was shredded and covered in blood. He had done this to himself in front of me. I was 7. On the first 9 evenings of the 10 holiest days in the Shia Muslim calendar, my family and I would join the rest of our community at mosque, separated by gender, to beat at our chests with our hands. Standing in a wide circle under fluorescent tubes emitting a cheap, bright light, the most impassioned beaters would huddle at the front, topless, in the hope of inflicting just a little more pain. That is an intriguing, a little unsettling beginning to A Dutiful Boy by Mohsin Zaidi. We have 3 more books to go. Next is Competing with Idiots, Herman and Joe Mankiewicz, a dual portrait by Nick Davis. This is published by Knopf, and full disclosure, this was gifted to me by the team at Knopf because I had mentioned that I was interested in this book. Again, in that same video where I talked about my most anticipated new releases in the latter part of 2021, and someone from their team offered to send it to me, and I wasn't going to say no. So here it is. Now, I love old Hollywood, so this one is a gimme for me. Herman and Joe Mankiewicz were brothers who both ended up working in Hollywood and making it big. Famously, Herman went out to Hollywood first and sent a telegram to a journalist friend back in New York that read, "Millions are to be grabbed out here, and your only competition is idiots. Don't let this get around." Herman went on to co-write Citizen Kane with Orson Welles. There's a lot of debate about who wrote more of it, possibly Herman Mankiewicz. And he also really struggled with alcoholism, which sort of derailed his career over time. And those incidents in particular are portrayed in the movie Mank, directed by David Fincher, which was released last year and is available on Netflix. Herman Mankiewicz was played by Gary Oldman in that movie. Joe Mankiewicz was 11 years younger and eventually surpassed his brother in terms of careers in Hollywood. The biggest highlight of Joe Mankiewicz's career was writing and directing the movie All About Eve. So these brothers are responsible for some of Hollywood's biggest classic movies. Nick Davis is Herman Mankiewicz's grandson, and he draws on his pretty unfettered access to tell the story of two brothers struggling to make it big and stay on top, as well as the story of the time in which they lived and worked. So it sounds really interesting to me. Let's do the opening of Competing with Idiots. Part 1 opens actually with that famous telegram, "Will you accept $300 per week to work for Paramount Pictures? All expenses paid. The $300 is peanuts. Millions are to be grabbed out here, and your only competition is idiots. Don't let this get around." Telegram, Herman J. Mankiewicz to Ben Hecht, 1926. Actual opening, Chapter 1, Rosebud. As a young boy, Herman Mankiewicz found himself in trouble nearly every day, and for one infraction or another, he often found himself virtually imprisoned in his room to think about what he had done. It was practically an afternoon ritual. But as he later told a psychoanalyst in Hollywood, what remained most vivid about those enforced solitary confinements was not the thought he gave to his alleged misdeeds, or any shame over having committed these dastardly acts, or even the deep and profound rage at his father, or less frequently mother, for the enforced exile, though the anger was severe indeed and would remain with him forever, but the exquisite feelings he felt in being alone, the sights he saw, and the smells and sounds that surrounded him outside his window in New York City. And that is the opening of Competing with Idiots, Herman and Joe Mankiewicz, a dual portrait by Nick Davis. The penultimate book in my October book haul is Sankofa, a novel by Chibundu Onuzo. This is published by Catapult, and Catapult is a publisher I've been seeing a lot of interesting stuff from this year, so they're one that I kind of want to pay more attention to going forward. But anyway, this follows a woman named Anna. After Anna's mother dies, she uncovers clues about the father she never knew. Following the trail, Anna reads student diaries tracing her father's young life and heads to Africa to track him down, where he has become the president/dictator of a small nation in West Africa. Sankofa is about family and hidden roots, naturally, but it's also about inheritance, identity, and the African diaspora. It has also been described as moving and funny, which kind of surprised me. I wasn't really expecting to hear this book talked about as humorous, but there it is. Sankofa, by the way, is a word that means to retrieve, and it is symbolized by a bird that is facing forward while looking back and holding an egg, which symbolizes the future in its mouth. It refers to the quest for knowledge, and there it is, embodied right there on the cover of the book. I actually have been following Chibundu Onuzo on Instagram, and she seems like a really lovely lady, and I'm very excited to read her book. Let's do the opening. Chapter 1. My mother was 6 months dead when I opened the trunk I found under her bed. I opened the trunk on the same day her headstone was erected. Rose, my daughter, accompanied me to the ceremony. I wore black like it was a second funeral. Grass had grown over her grave, the earth erasing all memory of its disturbance. The headstone was marble, paid for by my mother's funeral insurance. Rose chose the gold-lettered inscription. And as the opening of Sankofa by Chibundu Onuzo. The final book in my October book haul is another hefty one. It's The Lincoln Highway, a novel by Amor Towles. I've heard great things about Towles' previous novels, The Rules of Civility and A Gentleman in Moscow, but I have never read any of his works so far. So maybe this will be the one that I finally get around to reading. And maybe the fact that I have a copy of it will help that process. We'll find out. It is historical fiction, which is sort of Towles' wheelhouse. It's set in 1954, and it follows Emmett, who is 18 and has just served 15 months in a juvenile work farm for involuntary manslaughter. His parents are gone, and their family farm has just been foreclosed upon by a bank. Emmett wants to go home to pick up his 8-year-old brother Billy and head to California so they can both start their lives over. But instead, Emmett discovers that 2 boys from the work farm have stowed away in the car when he headed home to pick up his brother, and their plans are very different from Emmett's. So he ends up going in the opposite direction with these 2 boys and Billy and heading toward New York. And it's about everything that happens to them along the way. And that sounds pretty interesting. And this, by the way, is published by Viking. Let's do the opening of the book. It opens with a quote from O Pioneers by Willa Cather. Chapter 1, Emmett, June 12th, 1954. June 12th is 2 days before my birthday, but I was not born in 1954. June 12th, 1954. The drive from Salina to Morgan was 3 hours, and for much of it, Emmett hadn't said a word. For the first 60 miles or so, Warden Williams had made an effort at friendly conversation. He had told a few stories about his childhood back east and asked a few questions about Emmett's on the farm. But this was the last they'd be together, and Emmett didn't see much sense in going into all of that now. So when they crossed the border from Kansas into Nebraska and the warden turned on the radio, Emmett stared out the window at the prairie, keeping his thoughts to himself. So it's interesting because June 12th is 2 days before my birthday, and Salina, Kansas is where Joel comes from. So that's just a little interesting fact about this book. Anyway, those are all of the books that I have brought into my library in the month of October. I would love to hear what you think about them, if you've read them, if you're interested in them, if you have suggestions based on them, if there are any books in there that you think I should stay away from. Let me know all of that stuff. Put it in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.